Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. I, as always, am your host Simon, and in this one I was browsing around the internet and I found out that they tried to build a skyscraper, or they wanted to build a skyscraper in the 19th century, which seemed pretty crazy, or, you know, for the scale of it, it was going to be in Victorian England, so let's jump in and learn all about it. The very first skyscraper design in the world was proposed in Victorian England by British architect Charles Burton. Had his proposal of a 1,000-foot building in Sydenham become a reality, the architectural landscape of Britain, and by extension the world, might have been transformed forever. About 170 years ago, in 1851, the design for the first proposed skyscraper in the world was published in The Builder, one of Britain's oldest B2B architectural journals. Originally designed by Charles Burton, this building would have been more than 50 stories high and made from sheet glass and iron. In practical terms, it would have been only slightly shorter than The Shard, which is currently the tallest building in the United Kingdom. And I can tell you, I've seen that thing. It's tall. It's a really tall building. However, since the ground is actually a little bit higher in Sydenham, the proposed location of this unbuilt skyscraper, the highest point of the building would have actually been higher than that of the Shard. But that doesn't really count, because then it'd be like, yeah, I built a sandcastle on top of Mount Everest. Tallest building in the world. As originally planned, the skyscraper would have been built almost entirely from recycled materials left over from the Great Exhibition of 1851. The Great Exhibition of the Works of Industry of all nations was held in Hyde Park, London between the 1st of May and the 15th of October in the year 1851. Organised by Prince Albert, husband of Queen Victoria, it was the first of many exhibitions of global culture and industry that gained great popularity in the 19th century. To house the exhibition, a special building, nicknamed the Crystal Palace, was commissioned and built in the centre of London. And by the way, I've got another channel called Mega Projects which did a whole video on the Crystal Palace, so don't turn off right now, but if you want to go watch that after this video, please do. Considered an architectural marvel and a triumph of engineering, the Crystal Palace was an enormous success. However, despite its popularity, it was designed to be temporary and had to be dismantled after the Great Exhibition ended. Because it was only temporary, the building was constructed from a prefabricated design that allowed for the easy and efficient disassembly of the building's component parts. This was done to ensure that once the exhibition was over, the Crystal Palace could easily be taken down and rebuilt somewhere else using the same materials. After much debate, it was decided that the Crystal Palace would be relocated from Hyde Park to Sydenham, where the cast iron and plate glass structure could be erected once again, this time on a permanent basis. Consequently, proposals were invited to redesign the building for its new avatar in Sydenham. Architects from around the nation sent in their designs, but by far one of the most impressive and certainly imaginative came from architect Charles Burton, who had previously worked with Joseph Paxton, the original designer of the Crystal Palace. Burton's plans for an alternative configuration of the palace as prefabricated components were soon published, although they did not end up being approved for construction, and a different design was ultimately chosen. Yeah, if this building had been constructed, you would certainly know about it, because it was a skyscraper, a giant skyscraper in the middle of the 19th century. What Burton had proposed, however, was for its time a revolutionary idea, a 1,000-foot glass and iron structure not too dissimilar in design from a modern skyscraper. Burton's plan was to turn the piles of ironwork and sheet glass left over from the Hyde Park exhibition into a giant skyscraper. This 1,000-foot tower would have a huge clock in the center. The clock would be affixed halfway up the building, would have been about 44 feet in diameter. The idea was to use the new structure to commemorate the 1851 exhibition, which glorified innovation, ingenuity, and scientific achievement. When discussing the proposed building, Burton wrote, "There was never so favorable an opportunity to erect so gigantic a tower at so comparatively trifling a cost." His was perhaps the most ambitious of all the proposals submitted for reconstruction of the Crystal Palace. A series of vertical railways powered by steam would carry people up and down the length of the tower. This was what Victorian civil engineers called a vertical railway. However, it was really just an incarnation of the modern elevator or lift. So no, there wouldn't be locomotives racing up and down the walls of a gigantic skyscraper in Victorian London. We're very sorry to disappoint you about that. To build the skyscraper, Burton proposed stacking extending the iron frame of the Crystal Palace vertically up to a height of 50 stories. This made him the first person in history to ever suggest the construction of a skyscraper. The ironwork and hand-blown glass components of the palace would have to be transported piece by piece to Sydenham before the construction could begin. Unfortunately, the railway investors who wanted the Crystal Palace shifted to Sydenham to support their rail operations did not agree to invest in this innovative vertical design instead of a more traditional horizontal one. Hence, the more familiar version was chosen, and the new building at Sydenham Hill ended up being much larger and more spacious than the original, despite using mostly the same materials for construction. In its final form, the reconstructed Crystal Palace was a large empty shell made from glass and metal, privately owned and sometimes rented out for functions. Had Burton's Skyscraper been built in its stead, one can't help but wonder what kind of impact it would have had on the architectural culture of Britain and the rest of the world. Would it have encouraged the construction of bigger and better skyscrapers around the world, making them even more popular and ubiquitous than they are today? Or if the first one had collapsed under its own weight due to insufficient technical know-how, would it have turned the world against the idea of building skyscrapers for centuries to come? That's a question that we'll probably never have the answer to. Perhaps it goes without saying, but Burton's skyscraper design was far from perfect. In fact, many modern architects and engineers believe that the building, had it been constructed, would have been structurally unviable. In the mid-19th century, material science just wasn't advanced enough to support the construction of such a building. As a result, many believe that the proposed Victorian skyscraper would have swayed with every strong gust of wind. For a structure made from stiff ironwork and glass, this might have proved to be incredibly dangerous. Moreover, the iron at the base of the building would probably have collapsed under the weight of the upper floors, unable to support the bulk of a 1,000-foot structure. If that had happened, well, we might be remembering not the fire that eventually gutted the Crystal Palace in 1936, but rather the great collapse of the late 19th century. As I mentioned before, such a collapse like that could have well put off humanity from tall buildings for a very long time. Despite its flaws, various designs still exist of the first skyscraper to have ever been conceptualized. One such design, comprising a replica of Stonehenge in the Gardens, was sold at auction some years ago. Another can be found in the Victorian Albert Museum in London, the largest museum of design, art, and performance on Earth. Some 30 years later, the first skyscraper was constructed in America in the 1880s. To this day, historians disagree vociferously on whether the Equitable Life Assurance Building in New York or the Home Insurance Building in Chicago deserves the moniker of the world's first skyscraper. Both the structures were built in the late 19th century. All the while, few people realize that British architect Charles Burton quietly invented the concept of a skyscraper in London just a few decades before. His design was probably the closest to what a modern onlooker would describe as a skyscraper, as the two American buildings, built earlier, were just 10 stories high. Nicknamed the Crystal Palace Tower, this skyscraper would have been an immense and memorable achievement for Great Britain. If it was still standing, having avoided all potential disasters, which seems incredibly unlikely given material science at the time, it would have remained one of the tallest buildings in Europe and the world, even in the 21st century. For a building designed during the reign of Queen Victoria over 160 years ago, that would have been quite an impressive feat. The Crystal Palace, which was finally built, was really different from the Hyde Park Exhibition Centre. It comprised a new barrel-vaulted roof, 2 new transepts, and a redesigned and enlarged central gallery. Just 2 years after construction began, the new Crystal Palace was complete. The opening ceremony was performed by Queen Victoria in the presence of more than 40,000 guests. However, some 80 years later, a catastrophic fire destroyed the mammoth building on the 30th of November 1936. Thousands of people arrived at Sydenham Hill to watch the blaze, and Winston Churchill dubbed the destruction of the palace as the end of an age. For as long as it stood, the Crystal Palace had remained a cherished symbol of modernity and innovation for the people of Britain and the world at large. And as I said earlier, if you'd like to learn all about it, please do check out the video we did on the Mega Projects channel all about it. And as always, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do smash that thumbs up button, subscribe to this channel for brand new stuff every week. If you've got a suggestion, use the comments below. Thank you for watching.